clear the U.S. is pursuing a dual track of applying pressure with engagement. So far it seems like a lot of pressure, very little engagement, to try to get Iran to curb its uranium enrichment activities, and obviously it hasn't yielded any concrete results. The latest round of negotiations in Istanbul seem to be a complete deadlock. I don't even think there's a date or in the foreseeable future to meet again, which is, very discouraging. So by all accounts, the discussions went nowhere. What do you think needs to happen?
One is be willing to deal with issues that, in fact, we share some interests with Iran. So you have to start someplace. Be willing to start someplace. Don't insist that all of the nuclear issue has to be resolved before you can talk about Afghanistan or Iraq or drugs or whatever it is where you actually share a good deal of interest. The administration has shown itself completely uninterested in anything like that. They say, we got to shift back and focus only on the nuclear issue. On the nuclear issue, I have my own solution, which is not worth anything, but I'll give it to you anyway. It is that the United States is going to have to accept the fact that Iran has a enrichment program that they have paid very dearly for. They're going to insist on keeping some of that. And then you start with that as your negotiating point, that basically, okay, you've got this. We know you've got the enrichment capability. How do we keep you? You say you don't, you Iranians say you don't want a bomb. How do we assure ourselves that your enrichment process is not being used to build a bomb, one way or another? That means inspections. It means a lot of additional oversight of what Iran is doing. And there are things that one can do to provide those assurances. And Iran has indicated in the past that it actually is willing to do that.
I agree with Gary that about the issue of engagement, and he and I have thought about alike for a long time. But I also think it takes two to tango, and this is a time where there's no inclination by the Supreme Leader or those immediately around him to engage with the United States. In some ways, his fate really depends on not dealing with the United States or dealing with the outside world, or compromising on issues that he sees as being sovereign issues. So I think there were a lot of missed opportunities in earlier eras, whether it was during Rafsanjani or President Khatami, but I'm not convinced that even if we had compromised on Turkey and Brazil, that in the end, the Iranians would have gone along with us. I'd like to think they would have, but I doubt it.
In the Iran Primer, your chapter focused on, I think, a subject that is of great interest to many people, and that is Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. What is the evolving role of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran today?
Revolutionary Guards has always functioned as a Praetorian Guard, the protector of the regime. Over the years, however, in a lot of ways, the Revolutionary Guards has become the regime. It's not just a force protecting the Islamic Republic. And one of the reasons for this is that basically the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has used the guards to buttress his own authority within Iran. Khamenei has faced many challenges since he became Supreme Leader. His religious credentials are questioned constantly. And during President Khatami's era in the 90s, when the reformists dominated some sectors of the government, you had people question Khamenei's authority. And Khamenei basically used the guards to quell any dissent. In 1999, if you remember, there were student protests in Tehran, the biggest protest since the revolution. And the guards wrote a public letter to Khatami, the president, saying that if you don't step in, we're going to step in, threatening a coup. And so from then on, the guards have basically assumed the role of not only a protector of the regime, but a decision maker. And in a lot of ways, it's because of their involvement in the economy. They control or dominate or have a heavy presence in every sector of the economy, from energy to telecommunications, construction, pharmaceuticals, automaking, the military-industrial complex. So they're not Iran's premier decision maker. The real decision maker is still the supreme leader, Khamenei, but the two have formed a symbiotic relationship.
And now, on the Iranian economy, it's so difficult here in the West to get credible, accurate information about the state of the economy. We've seen many newspaper articles, analysis saying the Iranian economy is on the precipice of collapsing. You were there and you studied it. Against this backdrop, it's also interesting that under the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, he has been able to institute a sweeping program of subsidy reform that two of his predecessors couldn't do. So talk a little bit about that as well.
When I was there, you realize that there's a lot of internal bickering and internal dynamics going on between different political factions.
Right.
And what this is not a response to, really is not a response to Western pressure or a response to the economy on the brink. It's a response to other factions trying to re-legitimate Ahmadinejad's side.
Mm-hmm.
They feel very delegitimated, which is why they proclaim so loudly about how legitimate they are. They feel very delegitimated after the election. And one of the ways that states can re-legitimate themselves is through economic growth. So this is really sort of a Pandora's box that he's opened, that he thinks that, and the guys around him think that this policy and a couple of the economic changes that they say they're going to implement will lead to a big burst of economic growth, and people forget what has happened. Mm-hmm. But that idea and those set of ideas, they don't come from his guys or the Revolutionary Guards or anybody that is associated with the conservative elements of the state. They come from Khatami, Rafsanjani, and the technocrats that arose in the 1990s after the war.